Well, good, afternoon now for those of us on the East Coast. Welcome to Virtual Liberty Con day number 3. And it feels like morning. And for some people, it's actually already afternoon, Jamie. And
or the middle of the damn night in the case of Kacey.
Yeah, Kacey's logging in from, what time is it out there, Kacey?
Well, in Japan, it's 1 a.m, but I'm in New Mexico, and it's 10.
So good morning from
Good morning.
New Mexico.
So you almost made it to Chattanooga.
Almost, yeah, almost.
All right, this is going to be a roundtable discussion on the new anthology, We Shall Rise, which is part of John Ringo's ever-expanding Black Tide Rising series. This is the third anthology that John and I put together, and we're going to have a variety of contributors in here to talk about their stories, and John and I, of course, will talk about the overarching themes that are going on here. And at the end of the panel, stick around because I have an announcement, which John hasn't heard yet.
Okay.
So there we go. All right, We Shall Rise, which has, what did you say, John, the most Bane cover of all time?
It is one of the most Bane covers of all time. I would like to point out that I'm just here for the popcorn. I thought the cheerleaders with guns on the front was good until I saw Catholic schoolgirls on the front. And it was like, Jim Bain is up in heaven going, "You're doing well. You're doing well."
We got to give credit to Kurt Miller, who's been the cover artist for the entire Black Tide series. Did another one, knocked it out of the park. Sorry, Kacey, you didn't get a cover this time.
And also Jason Cordova, who it turns out was in the anthology.
Yeah, he was. And
that was a running gag of our previous panel. But Jason Cordova went, well, what would make the most Bane cover ever? I can't do cheerleaders with guns because Kacey already did that. So I'll do Catholic schoolgirls with guns. He said, yep, most Bane cover ever.
And it's a great story.
It is. It's a great story, too.
It's a phenomenal story.
It's a really, really good story. And I was thinking that if we do another anthology, somebody's going to turn into a story that features Victoria's Secret models and guns.
Oh, no. Just go full strippers. Let's just make it strippers.
I mean,
go out with the bang, if you will.
Pole dancing and zombies.
Right. Didn't Mike already do that?
Dude, that could totally work, though.
That was supposed to be the ending of Valley of Shadows.
Yeah,
that was the original ending for Valley of Shadows was a pole dancing scene where the zombies were being attracted by the lights and then killed off.
Yep.
Oh, no.
Yep.
This is going to happen. So now you're going to have the girl hanging upside down with her legs crossed around the pole with an AR or an AK or double wielding and shooting off screen. Yeah. Meanwhile, the one in front of her with the pasties.
Arms extended.
Yeah.
Or possibly a trapeze.
We are already derailed.
What are you talking about, derailed? This is a Bane zombie book? Yes, it's going to have girls with skimpy clothing and guns.
Did anybody have any expectations that this panel was going to be orderly and organized?
Oh, wait, no.
Christopher, are you kidding me?
No.
I've been in like 2 podcasts and a panel in the last month. Organized? Hell no.
No. All right, so what you have on your screen here from the People's Republic of Canada.
Yes.
Jamie Ibson.
Hello.
Christopher L. Smith from the great state of Texas.
Soon to be nation. Thank you.
Yeah, right. That's Dr. Evil Penguin to you, Brent.
Dr. Roeder.
Congratulations on the PhD.
Not to mention COVID. Good job, man. You've been planning that for a long time.
I can even
and you even managed to try to pin it on the Chinese.
Yeah, okay.
That was awesome the way you did that, man.
To be fair, you should never get in trouble for blaming something on the Chinese.
We all know who John Ringo is. Broadcasting live from a South American prison.
This is day 772 in my South American prison cell, but at least they let me binge watch Netflix. So I've got popcorn.
Normally from Japan, currently from New Mexico, Kacey Ezell. Good morning.
Good morning.
So, all right, now this is the group we have, and I think some more people will be joining us throughout the panel as technical things get set up. I'm seeing some notice from Discord. And if you're on the Discord channel, I will be monitoring it. If you have any questions you'd like to ask, we're going to be here for a couple hours. We've got plenty of time to go over to answer questions. First of all, let's talk about the anthology, We Shall Rise. The first anthology, Black Tide Rising, did fantastic right out of the gate. Great sales, royalties, which are highly unusual for anthologies, and still paying royalties, which is nice. Thank you all for buying the book and continuing to buy the book. So we got a second anthology, which was Voices of the Fall. It debuted at #1 nationwide and in Canada. So obviously, Tony Weisskopf, publisher Bain, said,
a
you
big
guys need to do
aspect
another
of that. Okay, the universe is nice, but a big aspect of that is that the writers who have been contributing are fantastic.
Oh, God, yes. This
I
has
mean,
been
we've gotten
fantastic.
such wonderful contributions. I know I'm blowing smoke up the butt of most of the people here, but it's true. We've gotten such amazing contributions on this. It's just
You
great.
should be so lucky, John.
No, I've literally done that at Dragon Con once, remember?
Not to me. Not to me.
You
said we weren't going to tell anybody, John.
Out on the cigar terrace, remember? She's like,
So
did
the
that
first
actually happen?
So the theme of the first anthology was just a continuation of the main Black Tide series. It was all dealing with stories from the fall of civilization as the H1N1 plague took over the world. The second anthology was actually about communication and how groups, the disparate survivor groups, communicated with each other and with the outside world. So when John and I were approached by Tony for the third book, which, true story, was at a funeral that we got asked about this, John and I put our heads together, and John said, well, you know, one of the overarching things of the whole Black Tide series is it's about hope and faith, which we've talked about the names. So John said, well, how about We Shall Rise? It's been like, you know, it's the summer after the fall. The zombie menace has, you know, died off drastically through various reasons. And what few survivors are out there are not just going to go quietly into the night. They're going to rise. So that was the theme that we sent out to all the contributors we asked to participate. And when you say, John, that we've gotten great stories, you're not kidding. This has been fantastic. And I was really happy because when we were putting it together, we realized that really we needed one more story. It's like we needed one more story to make the book complete. And Kevin J. Anderson and his wife, Rebecca Moesta, were like, I have an idea. Sure, Kevin, no problem. And so getting a story from Kevin is always a lot of, I mean, he's Kevin J. Anderson. That's a name. And he's also, and he and Rebecca, I think, did a really cool job with this. And this is the kind of story that I love about Black Tide, in that it's not set in what you would consider the normal zombie, you know, environment. A youth camp for troubled teenagers out west. I mean, it was a great setting. And when you look at all the settings for the stories for all three anthologies, we range all over the world and all over just interesting places. And I love that the writers have really risen to this challenge of making not just interesting stories, but interesting settings and interesting characters. So, Jamie, why don't we talk about your story since you were first one in here this morning, Chase the Sunset. And that is set in what country?
Hey, it's a Canadian story.
And by the way, I did have to send a note to the copy editor. Leave
Put
all
my
the
U's back.
Yeah, leave all the random U's in place. Not our fault. Not our fault. He can't spell American.
No, not our fault that Webster came along and started like extracting random stuff. But anyway,
okay.
Random vowel extractions
is COLOUR. Why not COULOUR?
The one that actually tripped up the most was kilometer when you spelled it METRE.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that was just pushing the envelope.
Kilometre?
Yeah, kilometre. Exactly. So tell us about the story, Jamie.
So the story opens as some surviving Canadians working for basically the Canadian remnants of the government are working their way west from North Bay. I didn't know this at the time. I did some research. So you guys know the Cheyenne Mountain Complex, the underground bunker for survival, stuff like that. So we have one too. It's like a mile underground or something like this. It's a crazy long tunnel to get down to this complex, and it was fully functional until 2009. That's where we track Santa Claus from. That's our NORAD base, and so it made sense to me that that's where the Canadian government would be extracted to ride out the zombie apocalypse when it becomes clear that it's not tenable. After Mother Nature has come along and done her thing, because Canadian winters are horrific, they emerge, and I'm getting a call from Mad Mike. Oh no, and he's hung up now. I think he's having tech problems.
Yes, he is, and that's funny that he calls you.
Yeah. So they emerge, and most of the clearance has been taken care of as far as zombies are concerned, but now it's about restoring some semblance of order, whether that's a zombie problem or whether that's a bandit problem or something like that. So our heroes are clearing Regina in Saskatchewan on their way through to, as it turns out,
Stop it, John. Stop it. I saw that look on your face, John, when he said Regina. Go ahead, Jamie.
I didn't name Moose Jaw either, but that's where the majority of the story takes place. But they have some close encounters with Canadian wildlife. There's a moose that sorts out some infected for them who've ridden out the winter. And then as they move west, they get to a little reserve base in Moose Jaw where the Saskatchewan Dragoons are based. And when they arrive, they find a hostage situation. And the majority of the story is about resolving that hostage situation, taking out the bad guy who's taken advantage of the chaos and the circumstances. But their goal is to reach Camp Dundurn. And Camp Dundurn is north of Moose Jaw, close to Saskatoon. It's Canada's major ammo dump. And it seems weird a little bit, right? Because, with most mill sci-fi, with most stuff that I read in Bain that's set more or less in the real world, we're talking about the U.S. military, the biggest military in the world. All of Canada's army could fit on Fort Benning and be outnumbered like 5 to 1. So that's just the numbers. But we have one little base in Saskatchewan, and they distribute ammunition across the entire country. And that's where they're trying to get to in order to start parting ammo out to survivors so that they can basically get their own clearance sorted out. And that's the goal.
We have one base like that. We have one base like that. But it's about the size of Toronto and Montreal combined.
Yeah, true.
Fort Pickett, right?
And I mean, they put it in Saskatchewan because there really isn't much there. But that's basically how the story goes. It's called Chase the Sunset because that's the mission, right? They've got 2 sets of units. One is going east, one is going west. Task Force Sunrise is headed for the Maritimes, where I am now. Chase the Sunset is heading west to BC, where I used to be. So that's the idea. That's the story. There they are.
And joining us is a rather disreputable group there, obviously. So it looks like Mike Williamson, Stepanie Osborn, and
okay.
Is that Lydia?
That's Lydia. Hi, Lydia.
So we'll need to turn the volume off when we're on.
We can see and hear you, folks.
Yeah.
So you might want to turn your volume off so we're not getting the feedback loop there. There we go. No, that's not going to work, guys.
Okay.
Is that Lydia?
That's Lydia. Hi, Lydia.
So we have a slight delay problem here. We can see and hear you, folks.
Yeah.
So you might want to turn your volume off so we're not getting the feedback up there.
Oh, he says he is getting a feedback loop. Oh, there we go. He just said there. Okay. All right, so the software is not working.
All right, can you hear us in real time now?
Okay.
No, they can't.
Okay.
All right.
This is going to get real interesting real fast.
Yeah, that's going to be rather interesting. So we're going to have to figure out why you guys are lagging so much.
Yeah, you guys are about 3 minutes behind us, which is par for the course, admittedly.
So you guys probably want to re-log in or something, or maybe work with the technical people there. So, all right. Well, continuing on. Thank you, Jamie, for talking about your story. Christopher L. Smith and Brent.
Hello.
Brent, how do you pronounce your name? Is it Raider or Roder?
Rotor.
Roder. Okay. We
It's
call him
pronounced
Evil
penguin.
Penguin. We call him Evil Penguin, or now Dr. Evil Penguin. And the two of you combined on a story which, Christopher, is a continuation of
Yes.
an earlier story.
Yes. So the characters David Pascoe and Alden Taylor from the Black Tide Rising story that I wrote, which, depending on which edition of the book you have, is either 200 miles to Huntsville or 200 miles to Nashville.
Hey. Huntsville, Nashville. It's an ill, okay?
It was fixed in post. It's okay. It's fixed in the mass market paperback and everything else. But
And what the heck? They're both somewhere in flyover country, so it's the same place, right?
right. That shouldn't matter.
It's only about they're only about 2 hours apart, so what's the big difference?
Give or take.
They ended up in Texas, so they're still 200 miles from Texas.
Right. they're 3 hours outside of Houston, which means they're still in Houston. So yeah, we took these two guys. So they survived, by the way, from the first book, if anybody was curious. And
Spoiler alert.
They made it. And we kind of put them in the situation of trying to get the government of Texas back in order. And they kind of decided to become census takers and also gun runners, if you will. So they really mean it when they say we're from the government and here to help you.
All it takes is a zombie apocalypse.
All it takes is a zombie apocalypse. So
It's not gun running if it's Texas.
True. It's just delivery.
It's like Texas Amazon.
Yes. Explain the title of the story.
Ex fide absurdio is, at least according to Google Translate, Latin for from faith the absurd, which we decided to run with and turn the whole thing into a mission from God, but with some very silly elements to it here and there. So Brent and I had a great time writing it because we were able to kind of pull out all the stops at times and start giggling while we're doing this, and then go back and go, okay, that's too much. Okay, go back. No, leave that. That's good.
So Brent, how did you get involved with Chris on this one?
So Chris and I were chatting one night, and we stayed up way too late. And so we just started kind of spitballing a story idea. And then we stayed up late another night and spitballed it some more. And Chris was working on it, but he was pretty occupied with some other stuff. So he asked me if I could help pitch in and round out some of the story. And we ended up coming up with, I thought it was a pretty good story.
No, it is a good story. I enjoyed it. I like the callback to the earlier characters. That was a lot of fun. And it's a very Texas story.
That was one thing. I had to make sure. I've only driven through Texas twice. So, I mean, that's only spending a month or two in Texas?
Yeah.
So, I needed to definitely check with Chris. I didn't want to talk about the cornfields outside of Houston or anything to kind of throw people off.
They might be there, but they're not where we were. So.
Yes, the cornfields of Texas. Mm-hmm. At least you didn't die of dysentery on the way to the Oregon Trail.
True.
So, but that was interesting. And Brent,
I actually one time when I was visiting Kacey, discovered there is in fact a left turn in Albuquerque.
Yes, a couple of them.
right? No, I know exactly the left turn that they talk about, because if you're following Route 66, which is the way that everybody used to get to California, there's a certain point where the road goes straight, and there's this tiny little sign that says 66, and it's a fork, right?
Yeah. Right in
and
downtown.
if you keep going straight, you end up in a Hopi reservation with a whole bunch of Indians who are seriously pissed off at a tourist.
Wow.
And you miss if you miss left turn in Albuquerque, you just end up out in the desert. So there is a left turn in Albuquerque.
That's
Driving
amazing.
through Texas last time, I took the correct exit according to my maps and directions one time, and it actually got me where I was going. So that night, I ordered a drink with dinner to celebrate the rare occurrence.
And so here's another question for you, Brent. In the midst of you working on your doctoral dissertation, where did you find time?
This actually got slipped in right before my dissertation. So it was in the procrastination period.
Productive procrastination.
Yes,
Yeah.
the procrastination period is a very key element of the PhD.
That's right.
I thought that's what the P stood for.
Piled higher and deeper.
Oh, right.
What was your doctorate anyway?
Neuroscience.
No, I mean,
Be specific.
What
was the
my
thesis?
subject was?
Yeah.
Oh, so I was examining different types of stimulation methods to restore memory for people that have memory loss, but trying to restore specific content. So instead of just trying to help you remember anything better, trying to help you remember specific things better. And we had categories for like animal, building, plant, tool, and vehicle. And we had a little memory game that people would play.
I remember.
Does
that.
this,
Really cool.
does this involve sticking a thingy in your brain?
I personally don't stick thingy in the brainy, but we have lots of people who already have thingies in the brainy for something else that valiantly volunteer to let me electrify their minds.
Nice.
See, this is the problem with science fiction. It becomes science fact.
I hate my
too
job.
fast.
I
say that all
hate
the
my
time.
job.
I mean, there's people like Penguin here that are sticking thingies in people's brain to restore their memories.
And he wasn't even a
Well,
doctor.
no, even worse, they're hacking the things that are already in the brain, which is what Penguin just described, right? The
Well,
things that are already in the brain. So they said, sure, you can hack my freaking brain to try to draw out my memories. Oh, can you selectively delete them too? Because I'd really like to forget Iwo Jima.
So there are certain things I'm not allowed to talk about. So I'm going to leave it at that.
That is, yeah. We're plausible deniability is a great thing. All right, Kacey, you of course were in the first anthology and had the cover, and I apologize that I didn't tell you about it ahead of time. I'm sorry.
Oh no,
about that.
it was great. That was the way I found out was so funny and so iconic. So yeah.
So for people that haven't heard the story, when I got Kacey's story in, it was on the way home from a cheerleader camp with the zombie infestation, and I thought to myself, that would be a great cover. Contacted Kurt Miller and I said, here's my idea. I sent him the story, and I'm thinking, remember how the Charlie's Angels had the 3 of them on there? Let's do it with cheerleaders and guns. And so he did it straight from the story, the gas station blowing up in the background. I forgot to let Kacey know this was coming until Kurt posted the artwork. And
I
what
didn't
was
even
your
know I
response?
was in. I didn't even know I was in the anthology. I was still waiting
sorry
to
about
hear
that.
that I'd been accepted. And so I see this cover, this beautiful cover on Facebook, and I look at it and I'm like, "Oh, holy shit! Those are my cheerleaders, and that's my exploding gas station." And so I frantically, emailing. I didn't have Gary's Facebook information at the time, so I'm frantically texting John. I'm like, John, is this what I think it is? And so finally came back. He was like, yeah, good job.
So obviously this time around, since that anthology came out, you've been awfully busy.
I have, yeah. So that story in that anthology actually opened a lot of doors for me. One of which was a novel contract with John and Chris Smith, just right up there in my screen. And then so that was really fun that we got to do that together. And then I got involved with Chris Kennedy Publishing to do some solo work and some work in the Four Horsemen universe. And I just kind of went from there, done a couple of other Bane anthologies, and just really having a good time with it. So.
And don't you have a book coming out with Tom Kratman in November?
Yes, yeah, the Romanov Rescue with Tom Kratman and Justin Watson.
Technically, if you look at Amazon, it's Tom Kratman.
They put an M on the end of his name. He's very upset.
Yes, yeah. I wasn't going to poke that particular bear, but you guys.
Oh, he did. He did.
Poked it yesterday.
He poked it hard yesterday. So there's apparently a fatwa right now.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's talk about Kacey. Let's talk about your story, A Thing or Two.
Yeah. So I loved the idea of, okay, what does it look like after the chaos and when things have settled out a little bit, and how do we kind of rebuild? And what came to my mind was, a lot of people I know, kind of our own sort of bug out plan is, okay, let's fall back to this isolated location where our family has some property, and what would that look like? And so in this story, I actually Tuckerized a family that are real people and friends of mine, the Hudsons. And in my imagination, they had this land that Christine Hudson's family had kept. None of this is actually true. I made all of this shit up. But they had this land that had been in Christine Hudson's family because it had been where a still was back in the days of Prohibition, and they had made illegal liquor there. And the thing about liquor is that it's incredibly useful, right? Like, you can drink it, you can use it to disinfect stuff, you can use it as, an ammunition source if necessary. And it's a great trade thing because people are always going to want it for all of those reasons. So the story is the story of basically Ryan Hudson is the main character. He's the youngest son of the family. And in the story, he's about 17 years old. And he never really learns to drive because the fall happened before he really had that opportunity. So he and his dad are doing a trade run with some of their mom's liquor that she's made using her family still to a nearby settlement or a nearby group that, enclave, I guess, that survived the fall together. And so it's a little bit about learning to drive the bootlegger Challenger that they found in the garage, and a little bit about how you use those driving skills when shit goes sideways. Because as we all know, the zombies, the infected, they're not the only threat out there. And so I drew a lot of inspiration from one of my favorite songs. And yeah, so it's a bootlegger story.
All right.
Road by any chance?
That's a great song too. That is a really cool song. Now, I think we have our technical difficulties cleared up with Lydia, Mike, and of course Stepanie runs away. Lydia, let's talk about your story, Maligator Country. When John suggested I reach out to you about it, I remember you asked in an early email, "Is it okay to write about dogs?" And I'm like, "Sure, we love dogs." We had no idea what kind of dogs you were going to be writing about.
Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
You're fine.
Okay, good. Sorry for all the technical difficulties. This has been a delightfully fun nightmare over here. We love this con. It's been so much fun, but the tech stuff has been hard. So anyway, what's wrong with some police dogs and protection dogs killing zombies? Like, what did you think I was going to do, Gary?
Well, those are amazing sounding dogs. I had to look them up when you sent in the manuscript. They're gorgeous, and wow, I do not want to get one of those angry at me.
No, not at all. And the Belgian Malinois, who have the nickname Maligators, they're a pretty. What are they? They're a cross between German Shepherds and, gosh, I can't remember the name of the other breed just off the top of my head, but they're beautiful, smart, very high maintenance dogs that want to work, and if you don't work them, they will get into trouble.
They were bred because German Shepherds needed heroes too.
Yes, they need heroes. But yes, they have quite the reputation for biting something and not letting go, and so I thought the Maligator title would be a lot of fun to do. But the reason I wrote a story about dogs and farm equipment is because I grew up out in the middle of nowhere in Shelby County farmland, on a farm growing corn and soybeans with beef cows and dairy cows when I was young. And that was my life. And I hadn't really seen that represented in any of the Black Tide Rising stories and anthologies up until this point. And actually, I originally considered writing about the infrastructure of saving the livestock, basically keeping the livestock, breeds and lines and stuff for all the cattle and the pigs and all the things that society had depended on for their meats. Keeping those alive, saving them from the zombies, gathering up, saving them from the packs of wild dogs and everything, and how that would work logistically. But I eventually decided that wasn't really interesting enough. Like, I probably could write it and make it interesting, but it didn't really have the punch that I wanted it to have. And so then I'm like, well, what about dogs, especially specific working dog breeds that are rare, in the sense that only a few people breed them. And so by the time of the fall, like most of these
Malinois
dogs
are extremely common these days.
Well, so yes, in terms of like the general breeds are pretty widespread, but breeds that are, bred by certain breeders around the world with specific traits and a good track record, shall we say. So these breeders around the world for a lot of these working dogs probably have been overwhelmed and dead, and the dogs are running around, feral or, being killed by zombies. And so I was like, well, what if this one breeder like managed to get, just the right dogs at the right time, and then he starts training them to kill zombies? And then what if a farming community like needed to get rid of all the zombies? Well, what would they do? They don't have a bunch of guns. They have some hunting guns and stuff. They've got ammo, but they've already used it because it's been about a year. So, we've got combines, we've got batwing mowers, we've got like giant pesticide, sprayers to spray all the zombies down. And, they're 18 feet in the air, so it's not like zombies can get to them. So I just had a lot of fun figuring out the logistics of how a bunch of like, country farmers would like get together and use dogs in their just industrial farm equipment to kick butt. So
Chris and I were having part of a kind of a roundtable discussion a while back. We were talking about the various types of farm equipment that could be used to harvest zombies. It was a very odd conversation.
It's been done in a movie.
But fun, but very fun.
Because, it was discussing how certain body parts go right through a thresher, but other parts could be problematic, especially if somebody had like an artificial hip. That would be really bad.
Yeah. And like, I was thinking about for like the batwing mowers and stuff and researching like how you could modify that. And with just a blowtorch, and the right, like shop equipment, you could pull off all the guards and basically cut the frame back to almost nothing. So you get lots of open space for all those blades going back and forth, and they just become a whirlwind of death, cutting off all the ankles. And honestly, in my story, that's
been done in a before. That's great.
The main like lethality of the death parade that they drive through the town of all the farm equipment was not just all the big equipment, it was the pesticide sprayer. I did quite a bit of research into the pesticide they were going to use to spray everything down as they went through. And so all of these zombies that are there and not necessarily getting injured are getting sprayed with this pesticide, and all the dead bodies are getting sprayed with the pesticide. And so then all the zombies from all the surrounding area are coming to feed, having a feeding frenzy, and they're eating the pesticide. So they're only directly killing about a quarter of the zombies through the farm equipment, and then the other 3/4 that die are all through poisoning from that pesticide. So moral of the story, be careful with your pesticides.
Oh, everybody's got to be careful.
As the guy who officially runs the universe, even though I really don't do anything anymore, which is true. One of the things Massa in a previous thing brought up hip replacements and knee replacements. Hip replacements and knee replacements, 99% of those are in people who are older. And zombies that are older are not going to survive for very long in that environment. They're just not. The majority of the zombies that survived were between 18 and 30.
Right.
So the older zombies were going to be dead anyway, because they just wouldn't be able to survive. The other zombies would have eaten them. So you don't have to worry about hip replacements.
Yeah. We love your cat, Gary.
That discussion entirely out.
No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die. One of my cats decided that she was not getting enough attention, and the computer was getting too much attention. So, yeah, it was an interesting story, and I'm wondering, when 101 Dalmatians came out, everybody went and bought Dalmatians, and certain things like that people will buy things. I wonder how many people reading this story are going to go, I need one of them alligator dogs.
That's what Bear was in Person of Interest.
Yeah,
that's already happened. That's one of the reasons that Malinois are so popular.
That's right. Person of Interest. I forgot that was their dog. He was an awesome dog.
Yeah, he was an awesome dog.
John Wick 3.
Well, I really, writing this story, I really wanted to go get a German Shepherd or a Belgian Malinois, but with 2 kids and 2 cats and a writing crew already, I didn't have the energy and time for one, because they really do take a lot of attention, not necessarily that they're needy, but that they are working dogs. And so if you are not their alpha, then they'll get into a lot of trouble, and it can really affect them health-wise. They need an alpha to tell them what to do, to give them a job, and to spend time with them every day, like working them. And so that just wasn't something I could commit to. But I would love to have some of those dogs one day, like maybe when I'm older and, go out in the country and buy a farm and, get me some goats. We'll see.
And by the way, for the rest of the panel, when Chris comes back, let's all pretend that we were talking about him.
I can still hear you.
Oh, God. Well, so much for that plan. Okay.
That's actually a line from a book, right?
Moving on.
Hear you, right?
Moving on.
Next?
Michael Z. Williamson and Stepanie Osborn wrote a story that I thought went really in an interesting direction, because we talk about We Shall Rise. This is really about a group of people that are bound and determined to not let the past go away, period, involving NASA and spaceflight. So where did this story come from, Mike and Stepanie?
I wanted in the anthology, and I was trying to think, what can we do? Bringing power plants back up. It's been done. Bringing, farming. It can be very interesting, but hard to cover anything. So I already had a trip planned down to Florida to meet some people, do some research, sign some books, see a launch. It's like, launching a rocket takes a lot of technology, and that would definitely be a demonstration of of might of man over nature. But I don't have all the technical knowledge. But I happen to know someone. And it went. So the first one of these I ran last year when LibertyCon had to cancel. I put something together. Came down here. Stepanie was there. We talked it over, and then we started writing. And recently, the problem I've had with co-authors is okay, slow down. Let me put something in, because I'm also, I have no objections to them doing lots of work, but I feel I'm cheating them if they do all the work and I get half the money. So, so we put it together, and
well, I mean, it was he came to me and he said, Steph, and I first thought that he was questioning me so he could write it, and I was like, okay, yeah, I can be your subject matter expert. And then I realized, no, he wants me to co-author it. And I was like, oh, cool. And so as soon as I got home from that convention, he popped me some files and some information, and we started off. And it was really, really fun, because he had stuff that he knew and he wrote about, and I had stuff that I knew and I wrote about. And it just meshed. It worked really, really well.
There's this odd mix of medieval culture and super high tech, because there's barter economy going on, for food, for supplies, for security. The locals want the NASA engineers to do technical work for them to keep things operating, and it's like, well, we got a rocket to launch. And there's a recurring bit in there of the probe team is fabricating their probe right up until the moment of launch. And that came from a friend of mine. They did a low-budget movie. They had a screening scheduled, and he was the sound guy. And he's actually a very good sound guy, but he was putting the sound and syncing it with the edited video. And it was the day of the release. It's like, so how's the sound coming along? I'm still working on it. It's getting there. And few hours later. So we're on our way to the theater. So the sound's done. It'll be done in time for screening. So the sound's done. It'll be done in time for screening. He was splicing film in the back of a moving car. And it was synced by the time the film was screened. It was like, that's got to go into this.
Yeah, and that sort of thing does happen.
Yeah.
And in this particular instance where they were basically kit bashing the rocket, it had to happen. And the hurricane didn't help.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it was a lot of fun. So we wanted something, say it's the ultimate accomplishment. We haven't been knocked down. We're still here.
It was an interesting story because I'm reading this and I'm thinking, is this even possible? But everything in the story basically said, yes, it's possible one final time.
no, yes, it's possible, but no, that's not the final time. If you've got the people to do what happened in that story, then you've got the people to start rebuilding. So it may take a while. It may not be anything like the kind of launch schedule that they used to do for quite some time to
Or
come.
that they have now.
Or that's
a week.
But it's recoverable. It is recoverable, and they've got the technical expertise there. They've got the technical expertise to train others.
Okay.
So it's doable.
Right. I want to run down some of the rest of the stories in the anthology, and then we're going to go in a slightly different direction. Of course, the social distance, Kevin J. Anderson and Rebecca Moesta combined on a very interesting story. Brendan, I never say it right. Dubois or Dubois? Nobody knows. Brendan D. So, John, you're...
It's Du Bois.
Du Bois. Okay, Brendan Du Bois.
It actually pronounces as Du Bois.
Oh,
as
Du Bois.
in the boys. Du Bois.
By the way, great TV show, too. He wrote a really interesting story called Liberation Day. Jason Cordova has the story that basically inspired the cover. Appalachia Rex. Catholic schoolgirls, did not go well for the people trying to take over that school. Let's just put it that way. Jody Lynn Nye continues her very interesting series with Just Like Home. Let's see here. Brian Trent, who, by the way, was last year's winner of the military sci-fi contest that we do with Bain every year, wrote a really interesting story called Descent into the Underworld. And Mike Massa, who we have come to know very well. Of course, John, two of you did several more books, standalone books for the Black Tide. And he wrote one called The Best Part of Waking Up, which surprisingly is about coffee. And also is a continuation of the series that the two of you wrote together, the books you wrote together, John.
Right.
So that was a lot of fun. Now, so here we are. 3 anthologies in. We've made it about, what do we think? About a year and a half post outbreak. So I think we've barely touched the surface of what would happen. And of course, what happened in the real world over the last year with the pandemic. It's been interesting to see the parallels between a real world pandemic and a fictional pandemic. Luckily, the real world pandemic was nowhere near as fatal as the Black Tide pandemic. But I do know that John was getting a lot of emails and comments on social media when everything started happening going, John, stop.
It wasn't me.
The future.
It was Brent.
It was Brent that did it. We have to say who we have to do.
There are
a lot of people.
Things I am not allowed to talk about.
Yes, we understand this. But
There's a lot of people who'd read Last and Furion too going, oh, so this is who was talking to John, was the guy from this timeline.
Yes. Well, the question I want to pose to the panel is what do you think if the Black Tide universe, if that plague had happened in the real world, now knowing what we've learned from the past years, how would you change your approach to writing about the Black Tide plague?
Well, Dr. Anthony Fauci would turn into a zombie right in like page 5. I would kill that guy on screen.
I used to say that I thought that 90% of humanity was below average, and my wife said it was 97%, and I think this last year's convinced me that she was correct.
But I mean, John, you and I have talked about some of the things that did happen that we didn't think about, and one of the things that I think that
if the Black Tide universe, instead of starting in 2012, had started in 2020, can you imagine freaking Trump dealing with zombies?
Some very fine people on both sides.
Our zombies are the biggest zombies. They're the greatest zombies in the world.
If Trump had done his job, we wouldn't have any zombies.
One of the big differences, of course, between Black Tide and
Will the masks save us from zombies?
Social media.
We're gonna get the zombies to build the wall to keep the zombies out. The zombies will pay for the wall.
Okay.
I think
you
we
broke
killed him.
Kacey's camera.
Hopefully just her camera.
Yeah. I think the big difference from when Black Tide happened in the timeline and the last pandemic, I think, was the difference in social media. Social media back, when did we figure, John, that the Black Tide actually happened? What year?
2012, I think.
So we have social media, but not to the extent that we have it now, 8 years later. I mean, 2012.
No, there was a huge change.
Yeah, I mean,
there was that very, very short time frame. There was a huge cultural change.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I didn't anticipate was mask mandates. 15 days to to flatten the curve. Mass quarantining. These were not things that I anticipated in that universe, which would have changed a lot of things about the nature of the early part of the story. The first half of the first book would have been very different. Actually, Faith would have been the only one that was properly dressed. Because she did. I mean, she did the full... Forget N95, these little flimsy things. No, she's going with full face mask, the Tyvek suits. That's how she's going with the zombie apocalypse. And it's like, yeah, okay, she's dressed exactly as you're supposed to.
Social distancing.
Yeah, and all of that stuff. But we are dealing with a universe in which those things did not occur. So you have to deal with when you have a universe, you have to deal with the universe as it's written.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like I can go back and retcon everything and say, oh no, it's a lot more like COVID.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to do anything that's stupid ever again.
But they hit the critical mass pretty quick, right? Like, they didn't know that the zombie virus was out there until people were already 3 weeks in because the infectious agent had been planted in the airports and spread worldwide, and it just hit the wall. And then it was bites after that.
Yeah.
So social distancing wouldn't have done a thing because, unless we're social distancing by 12 gauge. So...
Which was what pretty much everybody who survived did. Mm-hmm. A la the cop character in the first book, who social distances himself from a naked 15-year-old girl with a Glock 40 millimeter. Yeah.
Well, the Smith family socially distanced by going to sea. That's a pretty big social distance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think people, if this had happened in 2020 with the social media, I think word would have just gotten out a lot faster. And I think the panic would have spread a lot faster. People would have taken it more seriously, not in a serious sense. They just would have panicked a lot faster. And I think society honestly would have devolved a lot faster because everybody would have been trying to grab resources and go hide somewhere, and get away from other people. Yeah, toilet paper would have been gone real fast.
And some of us can social distance from 800 yards.
I'm just thinking you go to Costco for toilet paper, a couple of zombies start biting each other. Next thing you know, Costco's just a bloodbath.
Yeah, and I was checking on Discord. Scott D pointed out that the difference would be TikTok zombie videos.
The memes would be of much higher quality.
Yes, they would, for a very short period of time.
Also, that's a derogatory term. Undead American is preferred.
Not for Jamie.
Living denied.
You're assuming they identify as American?
They're just sick. They're not really zombies, guys. Come on.
Their existence challenged.
Alternately vital.
They're not dead. Okay, we're not dealing with the undead. We're dealing with the infected. Remember, don't call them zombies. They're infected.
Cannibalistically
incredible
inclined.
argument on the internet as to whether or not using the term zombie would actually be appropriate because people are going to be pedantic.
Actually, they're just foodies. Let's just call them foodies.
No, we're the foodies. We're the foodies for the zombies.
Oh, true.
Okay. To be fair, it's going to be easier to survive in California than a lot of people say it is because of all of the zombies trying to stop and take photos of the person they just chased down before eating them. It gives everyone else more time to run away. You know, because if you don't Instagram it, you really haven't eaten.
Yeah, picture didn't happen.
So if this was 1970s Japan, all the zombies would have 3 or 4 35 millimeter SLRs.
I got to break in here, right? So I was actually watching a YouTube channel called Donut Operator, which is about cops, and he referenced something having to do with prepping. And I had never heard of these things before. Why did none of you people tell me about these? Have you ever heard of these things called porta wipes? Okay, see this? It's a tiny little tablet.
Yeah.
Okay. Pour some water on it. And you've got toilet paper.
Say what?
So when you guys said all the toilet paper was running out, I saw these things and I went, I got to check these out. It's actually like a towel that you get. And they're these tiny little things that you can get. You get 100 of them for $12. Now, when COVID hit and everybody was panicking, Miriam ran a disaster shelter during the storm of the century. And they ran out of toilet paper. And ever since then, she's like, as God is my witness, I will never run out of toilet paper ever again. So we order every month toilet paper from Amazon. And it's a little bit more than we normally use. So when everybody was running out of toilet paper, I was like, we're good. I think I actually sent out a picture of the wall of cases of toilet paper that we have. But when I found these things, I was like, why is everybody worried about toilet paper? You can get 100 of these things in a little package called porta wipes. They're amazing. I don't know who came up with these, but it is the best invention from the point of view of prepping I have ever seen.
Welcome to the magic show, John. Do you do
So
any
we get
contracts?
our paper products delivered from Amazon like every 6 months, and we had just taken a delivery. So sanitary supplies, toilet paper, paper towels, everything. And we've covered on Survival Blog. You can use things like newspaper and sponges, and towels, and some of the stuff you can wash and reuse. There's environmentalists who do that. I think that's
Old socks,
excessive.
old T-shirts,
Yeah,
anything you can use as a rag.
yeah.
We did it when my littlest was a baby. We used cloth diapers on her because her skin would get irritated from the disposable ones. And so, I mean, it was kind of gross, but it works.
Do y'all think people today would be better prepared for a zombie apocalypse than they were 8 years ago?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
All right, we see dissension between Mike and Lydia.
We have.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Some people would be better prepared. I don't know about.
Lydia, you got to get closer to the mic. I can't hear you.
I think some people would be better prepared. Maybe not a large majority, but people who've been paying attention are going to be. But sorry, let me rephrase that. So, there's a difference between me and Mike. Mike was always super prepared. I've been of the mindset, but never actually did anything about it. But now I've done something about it. So I think the people who cared but just hadn't had the impetus to start getting ready, I think there will be some people more prepared.
I think resources are more available though for preparedness, Mike.
Yeah.
Can I chime in here? I think one of the things that, in talking to people, one of the lessons that people have said that I keep hearing that people have learned is that they've realized how important it is to have like a close-knit community of people that you trust near where you live, which can be problematic. When you move all over the place, like I and my family do, you don't have a lot of time to form those like lifelong connections that a lot of people will rely on in a crisis type situation. And so I think that in one sense, at least from the people that I'm talking to, people have learned and we will be more prepared in terms of like, you learn who, wherever you go, you learn who you can depend on, and you build that community around yourself so that you have that those connections that you can rely upon. And I think that's kind of a cool thing to have come out of the whole Corona situation.
There's a lot of things that have come out of the Corona situation, which are fascinating. For one of the things, I agree with both Mike and Lydia in a way. The world in general, but especially the Western world, had not faced anything vaguely resembling an existential crisis. And this was not in any way, shape, or form one, but we hadn't faced one since 1989. Okay? The Twin Towers were terrible, but it was 3,000 people and it was done. Okay? We had not faced the concept of everyone can die from something since the end of the Cold War. And so there are a lot of people who, for the first time in their lives, have been like, oh my God, bad things can actually happen. So there is, I agree with Lydia, there is a significant group of people who back in the 80s would have been more prepper-minded, would have been, as they said back in those days, survivalist-minded, would have had bomb shelters and that sort of things, that all those people have just completely thrown that aside and completely forgotten about it. But at this point, you can say everything you want about Karens, but I absolutely guarantee that every Karen in the United States at this point is building up stocks of toilet paper. Because a lot of people who were just, would just laugh at the crazy preppers and make all sorts of memes about crazy preppers are now looking at it and going, oh no, we might run out of toilet paper again.
I haven't seen a lot of the prepper memes though since the pandemic.
No, you haven't. You haven't seen any of the stuff about the crazy preppers because all the crazy preppers were looking at all the people that were laughing at them, going, "Who's laughing now?" He says from his South American prison cell with his great big beard.
You need chalk marks behind you on the wall.
I do. I needed the chalk marks. I should have done the chalk marks beforehand. So, Mike, where I agree with you is that it is proven that there are just a lot of people who might want to think that they have the mindset, but are complete losses.
Going back as far as Y2K, one of the things I've noticed is that the disaster isn't necessarily the disaster. It's the people who want the disaster that are the threat. There were people who wanted Y2K to take out all the computers so we'd have a better, cleaner world. There's people who are secretly hoping that they're going to come out ahead. It's like the people who think that in a communist society they're going to be, the top dog, when in fact they're going to be digging ditches.
Well, remember, Black Tide was an attack. This was done deliberately. It was all completely off camera. I mean, we never went into that because that was irrelevant to the story. But that's how it spread. This was designed.
And it's also going to be people who are opportunists, right? Who are going to be a threat. Those who see chaos and see it as the opportunity to get good for whatever their goals may be.
The number of people before Y2K who were showing up at the gun show and the prepper shows, and I've got a gun and ammunition. I'll just take what I need from the people who didn't plan ahead. I've got a gun and ammunition. I'm statistically a better shot than you, and I've got hard cover and plenty of food and no need to panic. So good luck with that.
Yeah, the people, one of the things that I heard somebody say one time at a convention when the subject of prepper and survivalism and everything was, I live in Utah, and up in Utah it's just, we'll take it from the Mormons.
Yeah. Good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck with that.
And he said that, and I looked at him, and I realized it was like carrying on a conversation with a leftist. There was no point. It was just, you're going to do what? I was recently, because I was doing some research, I was looking at Salt Lake City, and I found a fascinating social difference in Salt Lake City between, it's something that I've never seen before because I've primarily grown up in the Southeast. And in the Southeast, it's very, very rare to have a house that has a wall and a gate. It's very rare. The Southeast is a very open plan system in suburbs. And I was checking out some areas in the Salt Lake area and going through on Street View, and every single one of these houses had a wall, it had a gate, it had trees in front of it to obscure the house, whereas in the South, it's like, and I went and looked in similar areas, just random places in the Southeast, and these were mostly fairly large homes, but even the middle-class homes, like the house that I live in, it's, what is it? It's about 2,000, 3,000 square feet, something like that. You would see gates and walls around those. And when you looked at the upper-class homes, they definitely had the feeling of being fortified. And it was just a fascinating cultural difference between that society, which I assume that's in some way influenced by Mormon, versus basically Southern Baptist Catholic in the eastern United States.
That's a really interesting point, John, because I've been to Mexico quite a few times, and it's a completely different culture and country there. But I mean, walls, everybody has walls around their house. Like, that's normal. A house without walls, like in the cities, even out in the country, like, you had walls around your house. And I feel like that may have been more of in their country has not been historically as stable as the United States, and of course issues with cartels. So I don't know if it grew up because of that.
It might even be deep cultural, because all Islamic societies have walled homes
for privacy, and it's a privacy thing for the harem.
And Islam held Spain for 800 years. So a lot of Spanish architecture is heavily influenced by Islamic.
Maybe
Spanish culture is heavily influenced by Islam.
Yeah.
And before that, you had Roman villas.
Yeah.
But keep in mind that walls are hardcover both ways.
It's true. I'm going to interject here for a second, John. I'm going to have to probably switch computers here for a second, but I want to ask you to touch on something here that we've talked about a lot with the entire series, is the thing that drives Black Tide, that makes it separate from other post-apocalypse series, is what you talk about, even in the naming of the girls, of hope and faith. This is something I really like hearing you explain to people that may not pick up on that whole system that's behind Black Tide, is that it's actually very much of a positive story.
Well, going into Black Tide, first of all, I'd never seen Walking Dead. I'd seen like the Romero zombie stuff, and I'd seen Will Smith's I Am Legend. And going into it, just like all of my stuff where I wipe out the human race, it's obviously not a great universe to be in. But it's always about hope. And it's always about competent people organizing together to be competent. And so going into this, I did not want to do the dystopic. I did not want to do The Walking Dead. I didn't want to do a whole bunch of losers who somehow got thrown together. And, a whole bunch of people who would have died in the first 15 minutes of a zombie apocalypse are always the ones who survive. I have never figured that out. And so I didn't want to do that. I wanted to have it be people who primarily kind of had their act together. And it wasn't really about survival, especially for the Smith family. Very, very quickly, it became about what can we do for others and reaching out to assist other people, because that is a very, very natural human inclination. Now, there are the people who will rape, loot, pillage, and burn, right? There are those people. but they're not as common as people think. We have not in Western society. We have culturally adjusted against that for so long that it's a fairly small fraction of our society. Now you get into other cultures and the fraction increases. But so the whole concept was, how do we rebuild? And that was right from the beginning. So Kelly's gone, so we don't ask the next question. So, Jamie,
Yes.
What do you think should come next?
What do I think should come next?
Yeah. What's the world going to look like after We Shall Rise?
I think it's going to be reestablishing safe pockets of civilization. You know, we've been dealing with the community. We've been dealing with the small groups, the tight knit families. You know, who have like their little enclaves and pockets and stuff like this. But you know, one of the things, especially in North America, is the ability to travel across the continent. And until COVID came along, we could pretty much cross the border between Canada and the States at will, and you could just go wherever you wanted, right? That's not the European experience, because there's borders everywhere, and so you had much smaller enclaves and tighter communities and that sort of thing. But especially in the U.S., you know, people don't think anything of going on road trips. We've got enormous networks of highways and freeways to distribute resources and that sort of thing, and I think it's going to be pushing back the wilds and tying stuff back together, you know. And whether you do that by road or by rail or by water, I think, I mean, there's some pretty big rivers out there, and people are going to be able to travel on those a lot more safely than you would perhaps, you know, riding a bicycle down a highway or something. But you know, if you look at tech levels, you know, we were traveling by canoe, we were traveling by steamboat, we were traveling by sailboats, that sort of thing, long before you know, we had major road travel and stuff like that. And I think that that's going to naturally kind of become the way that we start tying safe enclaves together and getting people back into something that's functional.
Okay. Lydia, I think you were in on the conversation before. Kacey, you weren't. What do you think happens next?
Well, I think, and this is not necessarily something that I am an expert in any sense of the word, but we were talking on, I think it was a Bain podcast about, you know, infrastructure and manufacturing.
Right, hang on a second, Lydia, which is why I said you were in on the previous discussion. Kacey,
okay.
You weren't.
Okay.
Kacey, you weren't. What do you think happens next? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Jamie. I think the next thing, you know, based on where the mainline story kind of left off with the Smiths and the reestablishment of the government of the United States, I think that the next imperative for them is to push that outward and to reestablish that authority over whatever's left. And so, like, I think it could be like a really cool kind of braided novel anthology concept sort of thing, where you have, you know, the representatives of this government going out and making contact with these isolated enclaves of survivors and saying, hey, the United States of America is still alive. We are still a thing. You know, we are here for you, and seeing what those reactions may be. You know, I can imagine that some people would be like, thank you. You're our saviors. You've come back. You know, we're so happy to be incorporated back into the infrastructure. And I can imagine other people being like, well, F you guys, you left us to die. You know, where have you been for a year?
That was the end of A Last Babylon. And John and I are doing something a bit like that, and something we're working on.
Yeah,
it's a small part of it. It could be bigger.
I know, like I can imagine this on a, you know, nationwide or continent-wide scale, and just seeing how, because what would it look like, right? What would a reestablished United States look like? Would it span from coast to coast anymore? Would it take chunks out of Canada? Would Canada take chunks out of the United States? You know, JB says no. But it would be interesting. It would be interesting to follow that thought chain.
How does the king of Florcubitamp handle having government imposed upon him?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's imposed very, 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 very lightly. very, very calmly and with an understanding of, you have done an incredible job. Okay, you have saved a lot of people here. We understand that you're not really somebody that works within the chain of command. We get that. So we're giving you your own. And then they hand him a whole bunch of ammunition and a whole bunch of people crazier than he is and say, go clear the Caribbean. Make it a gigantic pirate raid.
Right, but what does that look like a generation down the line? You know what I mean? That's the other piece of it. Like, how does this manifest into stability or instability 20, 30, 40 years down the line when the people who were born during this crisis are growing up or have grown up?
There's a baby boom coming, right? What happens when that generation goes up?
That baby boom has already occurred.
Well, okay, but they're going to reach adulthood 15, 20 years down the road.
I think a lot of those people that grew up during this time would be very resistant to reestablishing large, unified, and status quo countries. So I think there'd be, honestly, if anyone ever wants to reestablish the United States in the form that it was before, there's going to have to be armed conflict and wars to bring the people who don't want to be subjected under that again back under the flag. I mean,
one of the things that's going on with that is that you've got a couple of very, very strict constitutionalists in charge. So it's like, yeah, a lot of that stuff that was going on with the federal government, most of those people are dead and good riddance. And that's actually kind of the president's approach is, yeah, most of those people are dead and good riddance. About the only thing that the president is going to focus on in the near future is what you said. You know, federal government is here to take your guns because there's still zombies around. You might need to shoot them. We're just here to fix the infrastructure.
I still think there's going to be rebellion, though, John. I still think there's going to be enough people who are embittered and who are mistrustful that they're going to say, I don't believe you.
I think we've already seen I'm from the government and I'm here to help turn into a gunfight.
Yep.
I was going to say there's people in Yukon Territory and Saskatchewan who probably doesn't even know that anything has happened.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The zombies would have to walk 6 days just to get them.
That. Like when I did Chase the Sunset, before they reach Moose Jaw proper, they encounter one woman who has been basically feeding on the canned food in this town, and it's a really little town, but it really exists. And then the soldiers show up, and she has no idea. She has been basically locked in this little town, completely cut off, incommunicado, no way to call for help, no way to do anything. It's just been survive day to day. And you're going to find a lot of that, because how do we communicate right now? The internet.
Yeah.
It takes really smart people with some very specialized equipment to keep the internet functional.
During the Black Death, there were villages and occasional farms who put in a absolute strict quarantine. If you left, you didn't come back, and if you're outside, you didn't come in, and survived. They struggled on resources.
There were also ones. There was a town where someone had the plague, and the minister of the town said no one is allowed to leave. And everyone stayed in the town until the plague had passed, and all but 2 of them died. And it was about 140 something people that just made the choice not to flee. So it goes both ways, Mike, what you were talking about.
Yeah, and of course, the understanding that they were, with the knowledge they had, they were going to die anyway. There was no reason, morally for them to bring others into it.
Right. But it was so it goes both ways.
It's a tough decision, but it was the right one.
That is that's one of the things at some point have to make moral choices where, who's the person who, sticks their finger in the dike. In Kacey's story in the first anthology, there was somebody who stuck their finger in the dike. It was actually easy, getting blown up and, basically holding the ground and dying at the gas station. But that was for a group of people he knew. What happens when you're holding the dike for a group of people you don't? When does that civic mentality grow higher? And you already see it even in the primary Black Tide books, because you've got the Marines and the Army are like, yeah, okay, I guess we got to get back to this. But when do you start bringing more people into that and saying, we have to think on a higher scale now than just the small survival? It's going to be very Wild West, no question. And there were a lot of people who were fairly rebellious during the Wild West period. And in general, you don't deal with it by shooting somebody. That's kind of the easy answer, because the way that the military is starting to rebuild, it's back to having the firepower to be able to do that. But the much smarter answer is, okay, you don't like us, we get it. You can have your little patch, as long as everybody wants to stay in the patch. And in the meantime, we'll just go ahead and build stuff around you.
And then eventually you're going to get to the point where it's in their best interest to make that leap, and treaties and, also, and agreements become alliances, and then
and also rebuild the trust. You have to rebuild the trust. There has to be, back in the 1930s and 50s, you'd have these cowboy movies where at the end of it, the cavalry would always come in. The Fort Apache or whatever, and the cavalry would come riding in and saving the day. That was how the U.S. was viewed back then. And that was how the government was viewed back then, as an actual force for good. And one of the ways to get around the problem of people who are like, no, I hate the government, unless you can bring back Trump, right? The way to get around that is to rebuild the trust. And rebuild the trust by being a beneficial party. One of the first things they're going to have to build is a mint. They're going to have to build a mint. And it's going to have to be gold and silver coinage, because nobody's going to trust the dollar. They're going to have to make sure that the infrastructure works and try to explain to people why it's so important. So anyway, Kelly, you had something that you wanted to bring up. I'm pretty sure I know what it is, having to do with the future of the Black Tide universe.
Oh, okay. So I want to apologize for the technical difficulties. Let's all appreciate modern technology, which never seems to work. But
but it's better than not having anything at all, right?
Some days.
But at least I don't have to worry about any of you biting me.
We have 3 alpha geeks here who are keeping everything working, and they've been doing an amazing job.
One of the things about, you say there's no communication. There's no two-way communication. But if you go into any hardware store, or, once this sort of thing has gone on, and you go and break into some houses for a while, you're going to find a little wind-up radio that you can get AM, FM, and shortwave. These things are ubiquitous. Anywhere that there's anything even vaguely proper.
Well, yeah. I mean...
And there goes Kelly. Bye-bye.
So I have a question, since we're kind of talking about drawing parallels between, sort of the North American West and attitudes at that time. What is expansion going to look like? Because again, I can see great story potential here for, here's these people, they've been kind of confined together, and there's these wonderful areas with all these resources that maybe now don't have anybody or very few people living on them. What's that going to look like?
Well, I think
when you said that in a very, very generalized way. Can you give me a more specific, what do you mean?
Okay, so take a small city, right? Like, just for example, take Albuquerque, New Mexico, just because I happen to be sitting here right now. Albuquerque, New Mexico, theoretically, in a story, I could see a story premise where, Albuquerque quarantines and basically everybody dies, right? Like, the only people who are left are a few beta infected who've been hiding in the rubble, and maybe an alpha or two kind of like ruling the roost. But there are resources here in Albuquerque that are rare for the state of New Mexico, and there are reasons to want this area. So if a organized group of survivors decided to come and retake this area and settle here, what would they need to do that? Would they need some kind of like sponsorship by the restored government of the United States in order to have some sort of legitimacy? Or would it just be a, hey, it's there, we can go take it?
Well, initially, it would be,
those sorts of things. You know, how would that look in all its myriad facets? I think that would be a really interesting. Honestly, I think that would be a really interesting anthology premise, Gary.
And the bitch.
what do you think?
I think I'm back now, so I've missed most of the preceding conversation. I do apologize for
Kacey, what do you think?
I think it's going to look like all of the above, right? I think that there's going to be some groups who do have some sort of like I said, sponsorship, because, you know, you can look at an area and say, these are resources that we need. We need people to go and get those resources. It's a dangerous area. In exchange for going to get those resources and plugging into our existing infrastructure, you can keep what you find, but you have to assume the risk and go and get it. And we'll arm you if we can, or something like that. And I think there's also going to be situations where, you know, again, I'm thinking in terms of the Smith government, right? So if they're looking at it and they're saying, okay, you know, we need to go see what's in this valley because we know there's resources there that we want. And they go to said valley and they find survivors who have already taken that area. And kind of like in Speaker's story in the first one, that was set in the
Mount Airy.
Yeah, in Mount Airy, right. Where they go and they find these people, then they have to negotiate. And it kind of goes back to my original question of what's it going to look like to reestablish authority over those people and over those resources.
There's going to be a certain amount of almost gold rush.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Where
That's
you're
what I'm saying.
pushing back the frontier to go get stuff that is of, you know, huge value to the civilized part of the area, right?
Right.
And,
oil fields in Texas and Montana and Wyoming.
Go stake a claim.
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
But here's the thing, though. In the Black Tide universe, it's a resource-rich environment.
Exactly.
But you need to, you know, there's a lot of resources that take skills in order to extract them back up to a modern level. You know, it isn't just like knock down a bunch of trees or harvest, you know, the corn in the fields. That's vital, obviously, and getting stuff from A to B is going to be really important. You know, but you know, it's almost like, I don't know how many of you guys play the Civilization games, but after a disaster, you know, then you need to start reclaiming resources and building the tech up so that you can get to the next tech level.
The resources aren't going to be one
things
of the main.
I've been looking at is how far down will we eventually drop? And I find it fascinating because in the 1980s, with global thermonuclear wars, or realistically, now that we look at it in hindsight of what the Soviets actually had, what we actually had, what would have actually happened, you would drop down to the 1950s. It would not be 1,000-year night.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree.
You would drop down to like 1950, 1940s, and then you would be able to work your way back up to the 1980s within 30 years.
Sure, but you're still, Jamie's point is still valid. You still need people with skills and know-how to be able to operate said technology.
But what I'm about to say, Kacey, is right now, we would drop to the 1920s because our tech is so freaking advanced. In the 1980s, you had a fairly simple phone system that had copper wires and simple switching systems. Now,
and we don't know how to make that anymore.
The skills, I think, are why you're going to end up with the rise of semi-city states.
Yeah.
So what you're going to have is you're going to have people that cluster together, and they're going to be a city-state centered on a trauma center. They might be the only trauma center in a couple of states area, but they're where everyone for 5, 6, 7 states are going to go for heart surgeries, you know, any surgery possibly, you know, any major medical issue. You have University of the South is one of the places. That might be its own little city-state where you have a research center and it's everything supporting, you know, all the research and maintaining the knowledge at that university. And that's all that little city does.
Right. And now, you have the equivalent of pilgrimages to go there and access those resources and those skills and that knowledge.
And just
now,
getting
in the last anthology, Mad Mike, you know, this was a story that John really wanted him to write because it's right in his wheelhouse. But you're dealing with that, Mike, with, you know, the king of floor, Tampa, Cuba, whatever that thing was.
Cuba, Tampa. Yep.
Yeah, but he is literally creating his own government, and rather effectively.
Yeah.
He's crazy, but he's brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah.
But here's my question to that,
stand back up. In my opinion, one of the first cities to stand back up will be this one, Chattanooga.
We've got a lot of resources.
I understand what you're saying about trauma centers. Trauma centers are great. You know what trauma centers need? Electricity.
Electrical power.
And Chattanooga is the home of TVA.
We've got hydro, we've got coal, we've got nuclear.
People in TVA might be atheists, they might be Baptists, they might be Catholic, like Brandy. All of their religion is get power to the people.
Power.
That's
and
their
flood
religion.
Control. And flood
control.
Vegas will be another city to stand back up.
No,
Vegas will be a heck of a lot harder.
Because of the dam?
And the reason is it is not immediately on water.
Nope.
It's close enough to electricity and it's close enough to water compared to a lot of the other places out west.
The problem is when that water
How do you
goes
get
down,
food into the city in
Vegas,
Vegas? They're in a
Vegas gets
desert.
depopulated.
Hang on a second. Mike Williamson.
The problem with Vegas is if that water goes down even briefly, Vegas gets depopulated.
Yeah. And where do you get the agriculture?
Well, at current levels, it gets depopulated.
Yeah.
Actually, another area that's going to come back up fairly quickly is going to be along the Red River. The Red River has almost as many dams as Tennessee, and they're closely located to places like Little Rock.
Mm-hmm. I think the same.
However, there's going to be a reverse of a trend. And I'm not saying this in terms of the universe. This is just kind of something I was looking at. All the northern tier areas, the die-off is going to be massive that first winter. In the south, there's still going to be a lot of zombies. So if I was in Jacksonville and I had the option of moving to Portland, Maine, I'd move to Portland, Maine because all the zombies are dead.
I'm moving to Jamie's house.
We got room.
It's hard to get to Jamie's house.
That's what boats are.
I'm just up the road from Portland, Maine.
So, Lydia. So we talked about the infrastructure in the last book, or in the podcast. Is Lydia there? Lydia.
She's looking at the Discord.
I mean, I'm writing in the Discord and doing various social media things at the same time. Sorry, did you ask me a question?
Yeah, we talked about infrastructure in the last podcast, right?
Yep.
So in terms of where you live, what's a critical infrastructure item?
Oh gosh, that's a great question that I mostly don't know the answer to. But I mean, I could tell you a lot more about farming than infrastructure. I was actually just thinking about Kacey's comment that, the farmers that are already in my story that already created their collective, I mean, it's not really talked about, but they basically have taken over all the possessions and animals of all the farms around them for the people who've died. And it's, just a collective decision like, well, we need this. We're the people who've survived. So this is now our stuff. And when, spring planting, comes around, they're not going to talk about, well, whose land is whose. It's just kind of, well, where is their land that we can protect and that we can actually farm without dying, and how much food can we create from that, and who needs the food. But that's a tight-knit community where everybody knows everybody else. And then when they were taking back Shelbyville, the big thing there was getting back to the infrastructure, getting back into the hospital, seeing what supplies are still there that are usable, medicines and stuff that might have survived. In terms of like electricity and water, unfortunately, I know nothing about that. So Shelbyville, so we're near Shelbyville, Kentucky, which is got Louisville about 25 miles to the west and Frankfurt about 20 miles to the east, and then Lexington another 15 or 20 miles to the east. So Louisville and Lexington are our big surrounding areas. Cincinnati about 50 miles to the north. So we're on the Kentucky, we're close to the Kentucky River there. So
if I could get my brother Bill to write one of these stories, he would write it about getting natural gas back, because Louisville Power and Gas actually takes natural gas and it pumps it into a natural reservoir under Louisville. And he almost wrote a story one time about what happens if that reservoir explodes. Mike, what's critical infrastructure in your area? You're in Indianapolis, right?
I'm near it. Can you say that again, please?
What's critical infrastructure in your area?
Boy, there's a coal power plant in Indianapolis. There's lots of trains, lots of roads. The roads are in a terrible state at the moment. They just jacked the gas taxes up to try and repair them. And then
hydro?
No, and there's not much. The White River's not that big, and they've closed most of the roads going into the town we're near to do maintenance all at the same time. So it's pretty well cut off. I was joking that it's ripe for apocalypse right there because they're kind of corralled.
We've been having a conversation on
Indianapolis
Discord.
is a big inland city, so it's all trucks coming in. And
We've been having a conversation on Discord about trains and rail. And Brent, you made a comment about I can't say the word.
Circuitous
routes. And the reality is that most rail lines are actually very direct. It's just they're so direct they don't parallel interstates where we normally see them.
They're direct between nodes.
Between nodes, but that's where civilization centers is on nodes, and nodes are almost always on or very near water. And somebody pointed out, yeah, but enough zombies on the tracks. I don't think people have really seen just how big trains are and how fragile human bodies are.
That's not the problem. The real problem is that the rail system is extremely fragile as well. Rails need ongoing maintenance than roads.
Well, think of maintenance.
And you will not need the volume of transfer that you get with rail most areas. We're talking about 10% of the population of the United States at the time, so that's 25 million people scattered across the entire United States.
Well, think of the number of rail bridges and bridges over rail that have to be maintained.
Yeah, the roadbed
or removed.
So you're saying that Snowpiercer is not a valid concept?
It's valid, but it's not a case of, they don't need any support. Yeah, they do. They need a lot of support.
It absolutely works in a fantasy realm, yes.
Yes. It's actually a very good TV series.
There's no actual physics involved.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So but how do we, John, you said the population of the United States, or really North America, is down to about 25, 30 million post-fall.
Right.
Right. But which 25 million is that?
Sorry, I'm talking about thinking humans.
Right, but I'm just saying.
Are you talking about just the U.S.? Because Northern Canada is not going to suffer a whole lot by comparison.
I'm talking about the type of people who survive.
The type of people who survive will actually be a little bit more split on land. One of the reasons is that people will run to places like a Walmart Supercenter or a Costco,
Amazon fulfillment center,
and fortify one of those things up. And if they can keep the zombies under control inside, which will require the usual harshness that was shown in the books, then they've got the resources to survive with a little bit of ingenuity. So that would be one of the situations where you end up with the George R. Romero, everybody in a mall. But it would hopefully, if it was not primarily competent people who jab-slapped the incompetent people and said, no, you don't get to be like this. You have to actually be useful in this situation, or we are going to throw your ass out and let you be eaten. If they weren't willing to do that, then the situation would fall apart, and then everybody in it would die. Competence in that situation is not allowing other people to be incompetent. So you're going to find a lot of these Walmart supercenters and supply centers for grocery chains and everything else that have survivors in them. Your answer on the whole, how does this get broken up? One of them is possession is 9 points of the law. That would just be recognized in advance. You don't come in and say, well, you're not allowed to have any of this because we say so. But after that, it would be salvage rights. Like, okay, you've got salvage rights to this area over here. Go for it. And it would be like mining rights. And there would be claim jumpers. And one of the ways that government would reestablish itself as being useful is by cracking down on the claim jumpers. That's one of the primary The primary purpose of government is enforcement of contracts, is equitable contract enforcement. The entire reason for the massive deaths that you find in high crime areas having to do with drugs is that there's no contract enforcement for drugs because they're illegal. Almost all of the deaths that occur in those areas has some way to do with the drug trade. And so the primary purpose of government is to have an equitable form of contract enforcement. So the way that you validate yourself as a government is by reestablishing police, reestablishing courts, and when there is a conflict between two people saying, look, you don't have to shoot each other over this. Bring it into court, bring it in as a suit, just let's do this in the normal civilized fashion.
You're going to have the circuit court judge riding in at the head of a company of cavalry.
My great grandfather was a circuit court judge back in the days when he rode around in a Surrey.
Yeah, I mean that is actually a very workable solution for that system of courts.
And he would ride around with because most towns do not have attorneys. He would ride around with a defense attorney and a prosecutor, with a public defender and a prosecutor.
Mm-hmm. In some cases, the military still uses that model. My dad was a circuit court judge.
And two clerks. And they would ride around from town to town, and he would dispense justice. And from time to time, the prosecutor and the public defender would switch places. Just because they got bored of being the prosecutor or the public defender, it'd be like, yeah, let's switch places. So that is, the courts are a very, very central aspect of what it means to be civilized.
That'd be a fun story to write.
Say again?
I said that would be a fun story to write.
You want it? You got it.
I'll put it on my list.
It's a long list.
We were having a conversation during the recent Bain podcast about this anthology, which is available at Bain.com. Shameless self-promotion here. But we were talking, John and I were talking about, if we were going to do another anthology, what would the theme be? And very quickly, United We Stand. Came out as both title and theme. And I think we're kind of hitting on that right now is you have this, 25 million survivors spread around a very large continent with a lot of resources and great challenges, but we do have a lot of advantages just in our terrain. We've talked about the Mississippi River. The Amish have been doing horse-drawn carriages for a long time. We used to pull trains that way too. And there are a lot of horses that can, come right back up to the forefront of transportation. So you think about things like government and courts and things like that. Kacey, that sounds like it could be a very interesting story. How do you reestablish a system of justice in a post-apocalyptic society?
And as I pointed out in the previous podcast, one of my favorite post-apocalyptic stories is The Postman, the original one.
Yes.
One of the most important things to reestablish would be a postal service.
So Kacey, I was asking you the question of how would you write a restoration of a justice system in a resource-rich but low population society with transportation challenges such as the black tide? So,
and I apologize, I had an off-screen conversation with my wonderful hosts here in Albuquerque. So the thing that immediately occurs to me is this scene of kind of exactly what I think it was Brent mentioned, Dr. Brent mentioned, of you have a circuit judge and essentially a court, with the public defender and the prosecutor and clerks and court reporters riding in with an armed force. And I say riding because, in the Discord, we've been having these conversations about, transportation infrastructure challenges. And I think one of the easiest solutions, especially for somewhat remote areas, is going to be animal power, right? So lots of people have horses as pets. That knowledge is not super complicated to pass on about, as far as how to.
We've done it for 10,000 years.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And there's going to be a crap ton of greenery around for them to eat, right? So, I mean, depending on the area. So, and plus also rule of cool. It's kind of cool, right? So you have you have a court at the head of an armed force riding into an area that is maybe torn apart by disputes, and the armed force essentially takes control and says, okay, we are here, we are going to work this out, let's have the parties come forward. And you have a judge who is, basically, it's a little bit militant, maybe a little bit of, of coercion, but it's like, listen, you're going to accept you guys agree to accept the outcome of this court, as enforced by our people here. And then you have the phenomenal scene, and I would write it in a bar because I can't remember the dude's name, but there's this very famous circuit court judge in the Wild West who would hold court at the local tavern. And
Judge Roy Bean.
Yeah, Roy Bean. Yes, it would be a Roy Bean scene, with the at the bar there, and that was his bench, and that's where the hearings would be held, and then the terms laid out. So that's how I would write it.
Christopher, you touched on this in your story in this anthology. When you think about taking the census of Texas, you're already talking about somewhat of an established government and a rudimentary judicial system.
Yeah, to a point. We were kind of looking at it in terms of the weather in the last 5 years. So if you figure that Texas would be coming back pretty quick, because if you look at the weather from when the book was released until, call it 18 months to 2 years after the first book was released, we had floods and droughts back to back. So we had a lot of, like, Houston was underwater, 5 feet underwater. And then we had a drought for like the next 3 months. So any zombies that weren't washed out into the bay or the Gulf.
Was that when Houston had oh God, that hurricane where okay, wow. It
just parked over Houston, and we had restaurants that, no kidding, had water lines 5 and 6 feet up inside, to where now add to that all the raw sewage that ended up in the water all over Houston. So 3 million people, if any of them were zombies, they aren't going to make it.
Can we rehydrate the zombies?
Probably it's not if they're in the Gulf.
Zombie jerky.
Yeah, they're grouper food, man.
Yeah, they were pretty. So that's the premise we ran with, and that Houston would bounce back fairly quickly. Any survivors in Houston would then attempt to try to build, and that's why we had our guys be census takers. So the idea was that, not only being Texans, of course, that not only do we want to know where you are, but do you have the means of protecting yourself? So our initial is, hey, we've got all these guns. Do you want one? and our cantankerous old guy's like, no, lost them all in a boating accident. I'm fine. And he's landlocked in the middle. There's like a pond, a stocked tank in his backyard.
Lost them all in a boating accident.
Yeah.
I gotta say, we actually failed with that scene because we should have had them have a supply of alcohol and tobacco to issue as well.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
We're from the ATFE. What do you need?
Yeah, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms should be a superstore.
Yeah. Actually, I think it is.
Who's got the chips?
What was that, Mike? What was that, Mike?
Who's got the chips?
Right.
Who's got the chips?
Also, if ATF gets authority over strip clubs as well, I'm putting in my application.
Yes.
Mike Williamson has this phenomenal meme that's a picture, if I recall correctly, of his bureau, his like chest of drawers in his bedroom, and it's called the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and it's got like a fifth of booze and a bunch of his guns.
Liquor, hookah, cigars, submachine guns.
There's been a fascinating conversation going on the Discord channel concurrently with the panel here about the challenges of transportation, which ties into the next theme there of United We Stand. How do we connect between the survival groups, and how do you deal with, well, quite simply, banditry? What kind of era are we talking about here? Are we talking about medieval England? Are we talking about the 1870s Old West? What are we talking about?
Here's one of the things
Mad Max.
Hey, we're already wearing masks.
No, just die. I don't care. it's a resource-rich environment. Now, there are always scarce resources, okay? But in a resource-rich environment, you will have less of the banditry simply because it's a resource-rich environment. I hate it. I don't want to go ghost in this universe. I don't. But the only resource which is going to be limited is going to be females. There's going to be food. There's going to be shelter. There's going to be clothing. There's going to be fuel. You might need to refine some of the fuel. But the truth is, you know the whole thing about how much octane you have in your tank? If you go to a refinery that has those great big tanks full of fuel, you will find ones that say octane, literally just freaking octane. And you can take that, you can put it in your tank, and the whole thing about, oh, your fuel goes bad after a while, that's when you mix a whole bunch of stuff into it. If you've got octane, you can put it into a gas-fueled engine and go forever. And there's so few people left that there's just going to be a lot of resources. So is there going to be banditry? There's going to be banditry by people who are left over who were like just totally criminally oriented. But everything in criminality is just another job when it comes down to it. And everything is about risk and reward. And there's going to be a very high risk because everyone who has survived now has some concept of how to use a gun. Pretty much every single person. Okay? And the reward is, well, I can take some stuff that these people have gathered, or hell, I can just go next door and gather the same stuff. Right? So I agree with Jamie that a lot of our initial transportation is probably going to be by water, especially in the South, because in the South there's still going to be a lot of zombies. In the North, well, the roads are going to break down pretty quickly, as Mike pointed out, and as Jamie knows quite well because he's from Canada, and Canada has 2 seasons, or Canada has 6 seasons: winter, 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 and road construction. Yeah. So there's going to be problems with roads, but even like the rivers, if you can't use boats, you can use dog sleds. Speaking of working dogs, Lydia. So, yeah, rivers are going to be a major transportation source. Rivers, you want to have rivers for water. Rivers frequently give good hydroelectric, and they're frequently a transportation source. So rivers are going to be a major issue, and so is the infrastructure of rivers. Courts are going to be a major issue, and Kacey, to tell you the truth, I'd love to see that story. That would be awesome. But yeah, I mean, I do see people saying, no, we are going to resist the federal government. We were killing zombies in Washington with paladins, okay? and mostly you won't want to use the paladins on people who will just say, we understand that you feel like being more libertarian, and we can accept that. But if you want to trade with us, you've got to deal with our laws, because that's the basis of all government, is contract enforcement.
See, I don't think that banditry would be a viable long-term option in a post-apocalyptic world, because the people that resort to banditry are inherently lazy, and the banditry is hard work in this environment.
I think the people who are going to go to banditry are the ones who have no immediate access to food, right? Starvation in an apocalypse is the issue where you can see the end coming, but it's weeks down the road, and it's going to be a miserable couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. But if you go bandit, it's because you can go and take food from that guy. You know, nobody goes bandit over lumber. Well, you might now.
Someone in chat brought up running gun trucks with the convoys. And as far as the bandits, I'd like to point out they're going to be short of 9mm, and I'm not.
No, but no, Mike. I mean, you're being funny, of course, but you have a very good point. The groups that are organized are probably going to be much better armed,
absolutely,
and have much better leadership then the vast majority. Banditry is kind of romanticized in a lot of fiction, especially in film and television.
It's not an effective lifestyle. Yeah.
It doesn't last long.
I went with Mike Mass's idea for the books that we wrote together, but culturally I had a huge problem with it because, quite frankly, the Gleaners would not survive even a post-apocalyptic Tennessee Valley. They wouldn't have. This valley is so heavily armed it makes Texas look like nothing. I mean, as I joke with Chris, Tennessee taught Texas how to fight. And you tell Texans that, they're like, Chris did it to me. He's like, what? I went, how many Texans were there at the Alamo? I'm pretty sure that there are more guns between Kingsport and Chattanooga than there are in the United States Army. Right? Now, there's something
I don't think that's an exaggeration. Now, the Army has much larger caliber weapons because we don't see a lot of people with
Marine Corps Reserve.
Yeah.
155s, towed.
We've got both towed and mobile here between us and Bradley County.
And in Cleveland, we've got 155 Bradleys. Or not Bradleys, we've got 155 Abrams.
Yes, we do. The largest armored regiment in the National Guard is half an hour away from Chattanooga.
Right.
Mm-hmm. We have the guns.
Banditry, I don't see as a problem. What can reasonably be described as insurrection, I can see as a problem. The king of Fort Cubitan, right? He's absolutely an insurrection. He's like, screw you. And that's cool. You negotiate with somebody like that.
Yes.
And you say, you can be like that, but if you want to trade with us, you have to understand that you're trading under our rules, which are the laws of the state and federal government.
Or in his case, there will be great dubage.
Dude, we've got aircraft carriers standing up.
Yes.
You know?
But the king of North Vancouver has weed. Lots and lots.
Everybody has, at this point, everybody has weed.
Because it's called weed because it grows everywhere. And it's actually a very useful crop, too, because we all know how many uses we can have from hemp, and then the medicinal values, and then, well, you know, the recreational values. One thing I don't think we've ever really touched on is the post-traumatic stress of surviving a zombie apocalypse.
People are going to be messed up.
I mention it in a thing or two, a little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah.
But we're going to have, I mean, that's going to be the new normal. Everybody is going to be messed up.
Well, it says that in the books.
Yeah.
Everybody is, when the astronauts come down, they're like, you know, they're talking to Sophia, and she's talking about, when I first had to make the vaccine, I had to grind human spines, and I thought it was the most terrible thing I'd ever deal with. At this point, it isn't even in my top 50.
Yeah.
Right? And they're talking about, you know, she has terrible PTSD. One of them goes, I'm pretty sure that everyone on Earth does at this point.
Well,
but how do we deal with it?
Yeah, well, so what's interesting about that is that at that point it stops becoming PTSD and just becomes normal, you know, because it's no longer a disorder if everybody has it.
Yeah, but it still has to be dealt with.
Sure, yeah, sure.
Different people handle it differently. There are some people who can reestablish normal life, and there's some people who can't. That's studies from World War I, World War II.
And a lot of self-medication.
There was a colony that was established after MacArthur went in and drove out all of the war veterans on the Washington Mall. They rounded a bunch of them up and moved them down to Isla Morada to work on the railroad. And it was basically all the guys that just couldn't come home from the war in Europe. They their brains were still in the trenches. Who were then promptly wiped out by one of the largest hurricanes ever to hit that section of the Keys.
Flagler's Folly.
Yeah. But Isla Morada was practically wiped off the face of the earth, and I think 200 of them were killed.
Yep.
That were working on that railroad. And yeah,
I lived in the Keys. We know that story. Yeah.
it's something you're going to have to deal with on a case-by-case basis. And to a certain extent, you're going to have to be libertarian. I understand what some people said about, different people will react negatively to the government coming back. The government's not going to have enough power to impose over the entire United States this sort of dictatorial federal government that it has now. It's going to be a lot more like the Wild West, where under rare conditions you have to bring in some sort of force. And otherwise, you kind of let people sort it out themselves as long as they stay within valid elections. You've got magistrates, you've got judges, you've got a jury, etc.
Yeah.
Well, in California, in the 1840s, because it was so large and you couldn't necessarily rely on the cavalry to show up, they actually had it where the county sheriffs could call out the militia.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're about 4 minutes left here in the panel, and I want to thank everybody for joining us. The Discord conversation has been fascinating. It's been kind of hard to keep track of that and the panel, and of course, technical difficulties. Apologize for that again. But I do want to pass along that Toni Weisskopf, publisher of Baen, we had dinner last week, and she mentioned that the sales on this anthology are very, very good. There was a handshake involved. And we want to thank everybody who has purchased the hardcover, and it's looking very promising. And there was discussion about if there was interest in doing yet another anthology. I mentioned that John had already come up with a name and a theme, United We Stand. So that is what we are going to be talking with Toni about. So hopefully, cross our fingers here, we are going to get one more anthology in the Black Tide universe.
Just one?
Nice.
Well, one more.
Yeah.
Just one
at a time. One at a time.
I'm fine with this continuing like the Man Kazinda Wars, quite frankly.
For now.
Although at a slightly higher than the later ones quality.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing is that, Toni Weisskopf, we all know her, we all love her. She is a pure capitalist. If it's going to make money, she's going to publish it.
So if you guys want to see more, buy these books.
Yep.
And thank you for doing that so far. These anthologies have been very successful. So, and I think there are so many stories that are still to be told, because it's a fact, just the conversation in Discord about transportation. I mean, I've seen 4 or 5 great story ideas just coming out of that. I mean, C.S. Ferguson is like, I want to write this story. I mean, we're talking like, the marshals and the circuit court judges, and not just that, but blacksmiths and doctors and veterinarians and, trained craftsmen that would basically be riding circuit as well. It would almost be like the circus is coming to town. Now we get to fix everything and solve all our problems, and then they'll be back in 6 months.
Midwives.
Ooh, yeah. But doctors are going to be, that knowledge. And that's interesting, because there's the difference we have in, like the 1870s is that our medical knowledge has advanced so far, but a lot of that is basic knowledge that has risen that is not going to die just because our technology's died.
So both my kids I had at home with a midwife. So I can definitely write about the midwife thing. And actually, that's something that I have in my story, and something that every time I watch a movie now and they have like a birth scene in it, I just want to strangle whoever is running it. It's so inaccurate. I just want to kill people.
All right, folks. The anthology is We Shall Rise, and it is in bookstores now, available on Amazon, Baen.com, Simon & Schuster, so on and so on and so forth. It's a continuation of what I think is one of the most interesting post-apocalyptic series out there that has been my pleasure to be involved with. And John, on behalf of everybody, thank you for coming up with this entire concept.
And hopefully soon we get our copy so I can see what it looks like.
Yeah.
It's available in bookstores if you want to go buy one, Mike. So you should be getting it there.